So during quarantine, I've been going out to bike a lot as my primary source of exercise. And now that it's pumpkin season, I keep biking past these pumpkin patches. And every time I bike past one, I just can't stop myself from grabbing a pumpkin. The crazy thing is, here in Germany, these pumpkins are paid for on an honor system basis. So even in the middle of the night, you can grab a pumpkin to go. I grabbed a whole bunch of different types of pumpkins, but for this video, I'm gonna focus on the Hokkaido pumpkin. So grab a board and a knife and cut off the ends of your Hokkaido pumpkin. These parts are not edible anyways, and it makes it easier to do the rest of the process because then you have flat surfaces to work on and the pumpkin doesn't roll away. You guys should definitely use a sharper knife than I did because this was a struggle, and my Chinese cleaver definitely needs to be sharpened one of these days. But basically my strategy for a person without a super sharp knife is to kind of cut around the edges and pull it apart just like I cut a watermelon. And then take a bowl and a spoon and you can scoop out the innards of the pumpkin. Remember to save these seeds because we'll be using them later on. Now it's time to cut up the juicy flesh. So put one half aside and start slicing away. This is also a struggle if you don't have a sharp knife, but just push through and cut them into tiny cubes. The smaller pieces allow the pumpkin to cook faster, but I also find that it's easier to store when it's in small pieces. And I'm more likely to eat it up because it's already processed and prepared. While I was cutting this pumpkin, I realized how much it smells like melon, like honeydew or something similar. Is it just me, or does it really smell like that? So I have a pressure cooker, and I find that this is the easiest way to cook pumpkin, but obviously you can do this on the stove as well. I pressure cooked it for 2 minutes because I still wanted the pumpkin to have some integrity and not fall apart on touch. So the first thing that I ate today was pumpkin pancakes. And these were so delicious and so soft and fluffy. And what you need to do is add some pumpkin to a blender. I realized too late that the pumpkin needed the almond milk to loosen up the mixture, but once that's pureed, you can add in the dry ingredients and a splash of water. Let that mixture sit for 10 minutes and then heat up a pan. I'm using a cast iron pan, but obviously you can use any pan. And I spritzed it with some oil, made sure it was evenly distributed, and then just pour in the mixture. I like using a blender to make pancakes, not just because it saves on the mixing, but also because it has a spout, so it makes it easier to make more even portions. And look how beautiful they came out. Top it with some bananas, some coconut flakes, some maple syrup. You can also put berries or other types of fruit like apple. These honestly hit the spot. I must admit they are a little mushy, but I think the fact that you have the cinnamon and the pumpkin flavors, they just really complement each other and I just loved it. But let's move on to the next meal. These are some pumpkin lentil burgers, also made out of whole foods and plant-based. But basically cut up the onions and the garlic first and then toss in the lentils and the dry ingredients and the pumpkin, the star ingredient. Blend that up, scrape down the sides, and if it's a little wet for your taste, you can obviously add more oatmeal or more flour, but this texture was fine for me. And I portioned them out into 6 burgers, but then I realized that they were a little too wet for me and that they might not hold together well, so then I ended up rolling them in some breadcrumbs. This makes the outside really crispy as well, so it's a good tip for zucchini fritters or lentil balls or burgers, anything that's veggie based. But then I ran out of breadcrumbs, so I used flour instead, and that works perfectly fine as well, though I do like the gritty texture of the breadcrumbs more. And I ended up air frying these, so I spritzed them with some oil, but you can also pan fry them. And then top it however you want to. I made this garlic aioli, which is just mayo, garlic, and lemon juice. And then I put some lettuce, some pickles, some tomatoes, and then some ketchup as well. And it was so delicious. Just look at how beautiful it is. I'm getting hungry now. I ended up eating 2 of these with some homemade fries as well. For afternoon tea, I was craving pumpkin cinnamon rolls, and that is just what I made. So grab a big bowl, put in that flour. I put in a mix of high gluten flour and whole wheat flour, and then add in the sugar and spice. I don't have allspice, so I just used cinnamon, and I think it turned out perfectly fine. And then I added in some coconut oil instead of butter. And I added in some mashed pumpkin and some almond milk. Give that all a good mix. So the dough should be sticky but still be coming together to form a solid mass. And once it becomes too stiff to mix, you can start using your hands to start kneading it. I ended up kneading it for a good 5 minutes. If you feel like the dough is still too sticky, that it's sticking to your fingers and it won't come off, you can keep adding flour until it becomes just slightly sticky, but it shouldn't be rubbing off on your fingers. Once it's a smooth ball, you can oil the bowl and let it rest for around 30 minutes to an hour, depending on the temperature in your home. In the meantime, we can make the filling. So I put in some coconut oil, some more cinnamon, some more sugar, and some pumpkin. I ended up adding more pumpkin than this, but I think it makes the dough a little bit soggy, so you can choose how much pumpkin you want to add. Mush that all together until it's evenly incorporated and just set it aside until the dough has finished rising. Once it's ready, you can flour a surface and pour the dough onto the surface, then roll it out. Remember to flour as you go so that the dough doesn't stick to your hands or to the rolling pin. So I'm rolling it out and trying to get as even of a rectangle as possible, but obviously you don't have to be perfect. And once it's half a centimeter thick, you can start spreading on the filling. Make sure that you spread it evenly. Now for my favorite part. I love rolling it together, but make sure to roll these tightly because otherwise they'll come apart when you cut them and when you bake them. And this is where I made the mistake of using a non-serrated knife. I just used this bread scraper, but it does kind of smush your rolls and you'll have to kind of reform them when you pull them apart. At this point, the dough felt really delicate, so I kind of had to move quickly and make sure that the pumpkin didn't kind of fully saturate the dough and make it completely mushy. So I'm working really quickly, and I ended up making these really pretty rose patterns by accident because they were all smushed. But once you dust it with icing sugar, everything looks gorgeous, especially under the sun. These were way lighter than I thought they were going to be, and I ended up not being able to finish all of them, so I froze them. But honestly, if I didn't have so many other pumpkin recipes, I would have finished it. So for another afternoon snack, I wanted something salty, and so I made these pumpkin seeds that were curry flavored. Generously drizzle with some olive oil, some salt, lots of curry powder, mix it all together and bake it at 190 degrees for 20 minutes around. You can also air fry it, but then they start popping. These were so delicious. I'm honestly still snacking on them now. So not surprisingly for dinner, I was still hungry and still not sick of pumpkin, and so I made this quick pumpkin risotto. I heated up some oil in a cast iron and I put in some freshly cut onions. I sauteed that for a bit so that the flavor would build. Once it starts to turn translucent, you can put in the garlic and the rice and kind of saute the rice and the onions and the oil until it turns a little golden brown. Sadly, I didn't have any fresh herbs on hand, so I'm using rosemary, pepper, Italian herbs, and I am deglazing with some white wine. Honestly, this was simmering so violently that I thought it was going to catch on fire, but thankfully it didn't. And then I washed it down with some water. You can also use broth at this point, but I used powdered broth later on. Remember to keep stirring, 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 and to keep adding water when it turns dry. So here's the powdered broth. You can use veggie broth or a broth cube as well. And then I kind of burned the onions a little, so I had to pick them out with some chopsticks, but it's all okay, it's all good. Just keep mixing away, and once the rice starts becoming a little more plump, or after 10 minutes, I added in some zucchini. I don't know, it's squash, so it kind of is in the same family as pumpkin, and I needed some greens in my life. Mix the zucchini in properly and let it simmer and kind of cook down. And then once the rice was al dente, I added in the pumpkin right at the end because it was cooked anyways and it just needed to be mashed. Honestly, I could have saved a lot of hassle if I had just made pumpkin puree beforehand, but I ended up mashing it in the pan and it was completely fine. There were some chunks, which is fine because I like texture, but if you don't like that, make sure to food process it beforehand. I couldn't resist piling on a heaping plate of risotto, and then I topped it with some nutritional yeast for extra cheesiness. And obviously you gotta top it off with parsley and a squeeze of lemon juice. This was so creamy and comforting and the perfect end to this day. I ended up eating it with a pumpkin burger that I had left over from lunch, and it was beautiful. So sadly, my pumpkin adventure has come to an end. I'm still not sick of it, so maybe I'll make more videos, but thanks for watching. Bye!